Well, it looks like it's noon central, so we will get started. I'm April Campbell, Executive Director of ALA, and I would like to welcome and thank you for joining us for today's ALA Special Edition Roundtable, SALI Standards and Their Impact on Successful Firms. Please note that this roundtable is being recorded and it will be available next Tuesday, and you can find it by going to ALA's website in the green bar across the top. You can click on networking, and then it'll be there under virtual member meetups on our website. So a few housekeeping notes since we are in Zoom meetings. Please make sure to keep your line muted when you're not speaking. I will be monitoring the chat, as will some other ALA staff. So please feel free to post any questions in there at any time, and I'll make sure that our presenter, Damien Reel, will manage and handle those. If you would like to raise your hand, which is perfectly fine with us, you can go to the bottom of your screen and click on participants, and then click on the little hand to raise your hand. And then when you're done, you can lower it the same way. We will also have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Some of you submitted questions before the presentation, which we greatly appreciate. And Damien will try to answer those throughout his presentation. But if you have additional questions or you feel like your question was not answered, definitely bring it up at the end. We have made time for that. So before I introduce Damien, I would like to give you just a short lead into what we'll be discussing today. And that is the SALI standards, which are SALI stands for Standards Advancement for the Legal Industry. And it is called actually the SALI Alliance. And ALA is a founding member of this group. It's a nonprofit organization that seeks to develop open, practical industry standards for efficient and innovative legal services. It brings together law firms, legal operations experts, corporate legal departments, and business partners for a comprehensive approach. So this discussion today, we're hoping to demonstrate to all of you how SALI standards can help all of you as legal management professionals overcome the challenges of pricing legal services for client proposals, create, track, and update client budgets, and analyze what areas your attorneys are actually practicing in. I know sometimes that's a mystery, and how long certain matters typically take and what resources they require. So on that note, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Damien Reel. Damien is a technology lawyer, so he's a recovering lawyer like myself with experience in software design, data privacy, and cybersecurity. After working for state and federal judges and litigating for 15 years, he currently designs systems to parse and extract valuable data from legal documents. He integrates AI-backed technologies to improve legal workflows and to power legal data analytics and provide substantive insights. So now it is my great pleasure, no pressure, Damien, to introduce Damien Reel.
Great. Thanks so much, April. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for attending. This is the stuff we're going to be talking about in the next hour is near and dear to my heart as a lawyer who litigated for almost 15 years and as a technologist. The stuff that we're talking about here, the intersection of law and data in the practice and the business of law. And of course, the business of law is what the ALA is most interested in. The intersection of all those things makes my heart go pitter patter, and I'm sure it does yours too. So the stuff that we're going to be talking about is very important, and I'm thrilled that we have so many folks that are excited about hearing what SALI has to offer and the extent to which it can help you in your work. So I'm going to share my screen now. You'll see, you should see SALI LMS S and its evolution. The SALI is the standards for advancing legal, the industry, and the LMSS is what we're going to be talking about. It is a project within SALI to be able to essentially count everything that matters in a legal matter. For example, the things that, what do law firms care about? What do clients care about? And what do vendors that help law firms and clients care about? And we've put that all into what's called a taxonomy or an ontology. Those are different. A taxonomy is essentially a hierarchy, but an ontology is something that will make your technologist's heart go pitter-patter, because an ontology is a way that computers, machines, can take that taxonomy and do really cool things with it. So what we're going through is truly an ontology, which is much more powerful than a mere taxonomy. So why, for those who don't know or care what a taxonomy or ontology is, you might be asking yourself, why do I care about SALI? Why do I care about this ontology that you're talking about? And really the biggest reason is because to be able to answer the questions that your law firms and others are asking, you need to have data. And to be able to have data, you need to be able to extract that data from the content you care about. The three stakeholders that are most affected by the work that SALI is doing and that SALI is providing services for is number one, the clients, number two, the law firms that serve those clients, and number three, the vendors that help both. So those are the three primary stakeholders that we're helping answer questions. And the things that we're helping clients say is, clients often say, who is the best law firm for this matter? And the firms are often saying, I am the best law firm for this matter. Let me tell you why. And here are the analytics that prove that I am the best law firm for this. And by the way, I need to develop business as a partner or as a law firm. So here are the ways that we can be able to expand our business to be able to make our pie bigger. That's, of course, what the firms are saying. And then, of course, on the vendor side, they build applications that can help all these things. So one of the things that clients often say are, which providers have experience in this area of law? I have a matter that's very important to me. Which providers, which law firms, which ALSPs have experience here? And which law firms and others have obtained this result that we're looking for? Which providers, how much does it cost to draft this thing that I need to draft? And what's the cost in this jurisdiction? Because the jurisdiction may matter on the cost. And what's the risk of litigation in this particular jurisdiction? All of these are questions that clients often ask and law firms often have to provide answers for. But you'll see from these questions that the answers to this question depends on the things in blue that you see on your screen here. It depends on what area of law is it. It depends on what the result is. Depends on what the jurisdiction is. All of those things are things that matter that will make the needle go one way or the other on cost, on time, on the ability, the likelihood of success. All of those things in blue are the things that matter to be able to give a better answer. And importantly, all the things in blue are the things that SALI catalogs. So that's, for example, on the as you give a response as a law firm to the in-house counsel, you can say, we've done this number of matters in this area of law. Of those, this many were in this jurisdiction. We achieved the result that you're looking for in this number of things. And so those are, at least substantively, this is how we can help you, client, in this thing. Of course, as a business, a law firm also wants to know what their business's competitors are doing. So if they want to, a law firm, for example, wants to be able to find out what other law firms are in that particular area of law that I, as a law firm, want to be able to do business. Doing analytics on that area of law is important. And for example, clients, to the extent that I'm doing a little bit of work for a client, but I would like to do more work for a client, being able to run queries to be able to say, who else is that client hiring for this particular area of law? And how might I, as a law firm, be able to expand my business to be able to eat more of that pie? Of course, that client is also a blue area that is a field that SALI is collecting. And then, of course, vendors also can help in this because e-billing vendors, legal research. I should have said at the onset, my employer is Fastcase. So Fastcase has 420 million litigation documents that one big part of my job is to implement SALI in 420 million documents and then feed it back to lawyers in that way. So legal research companies, of course, will be using SALI. E-discovery companies, similarly, legal project management, all sorts of ways that everybody needs to have fields that are uniform, that are able to answer the questions like you see on your screen right now. So the best part about this is that you as a law firm or you as in-house probably already have this data in your systems. And in the data science field, we call that data exhaust. So just by the work that you're doing day to day as a law firm, you're creating documents, you're creating memos, you're creating briefs, you're creating merger agreements, you're creating contracts. All of those things have stuff that can be extracted from them to make them valuable. You probably already know that. So one from a granular level, I'm sorry, not from a very macro level, is to say, what kind of case is this, or what kind of matter is this? So for example, if you have a shoplifting matter, SALI already has a code for shoplifting. And the code it's a criminal matter. And then the next tag is it's a dispute on a criminal matter. So one way that you could use SALI is to be able to tag all of your matters to say, this is this kind of matter, and this is that kind of matter. And do that for every single one of your matters, and do that in a very uniform way. So that's one way that you could use SALI in your matter metadata. Another is, of course, you as a law firm might have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or maybe millions of documents within your law firm. Each of those documents have a treasure trove of knowledge in them. Of course, the most macro of that is what kind of matter is this? The SALI code for a transaction that is a merger and acquisition is what you see on your screen right now. So this is T for transaction, merger and acquisition agreement. So you could tag this document with TMMAA to say, show me all of my merger documents. And then of course, all of the lawyers, at least those that bill hourly, and even those that don't, keep time. And so of course, the timekeeping also has lots of treasure in them. One of which is, what matter is this timekeeping entry? So this is a dispute that is a civil dispute, that is civil litigation. And what kind of civil dispute? This is a patent. This is intellectual property, INTP, and it's a patent litigation. So you could tag all of your time entries, show me all the time entries for patent litigation. You could use SALI to do that. And then beyond just what kind of matter is it, each one of those documents has a treasure trove of data within it to be able to run better analytics. For example, show me a merger and acquisition agreement where it involves broker's fees, for example. Broker's fees is something within SALI. Show me one where there are reports for regulatory matters. There's a tag for that. On the timekeeping side, each of the things you see on your screen is also something that SALI has in its data set. So you can see that this is not just what kind of matter is it, but show me the stuff that really matters substantively, because that substantive thing will move the needle between expensive and not expensive and win or lose. Each one of those things really matters. So when you say, for example, show me all the, one area that SALI has is areas of law. So this is what I, as a lawyer, what kind of law do I practice? When I'm at a cocktail party, I say, I'm a lawyer that does X. So for example, I could say, I'm a lawyer that does patent law, right? That's an area of law that SALI has cataloged. Another area that SALI has cataloged is the services. And that's, I'm a patent lawyer that does what? And here I can say, I'm a patent lawyer that does litigation or disputes. So the services is, what services do I as a lawyer provide to my clients? That could include litigation. It could include mergers and acquisitions. It could include regulatory, right? Those are the services I provide. And then a third area that we at SALI provide is, what industry does the client live in? So for example, computers and high tech, or the transportation industry, or retail, or things like that. That is another thing that we collect. And then a fourth is, what type of actor for this particular matter is there? For example, somebody could be a defendant or a plaintiff or a acquiring company or a target company. There's all sorts of different roles that an actor can play within a matter. So where this comes really powerfully is that you can then say, okay, if you're answering the question, say somebody has a patent litigation matter that they want you to work in and says, show me all of the patent disputes where you represented a computer and high tech company that was a defendant. SALI has variables to be able to, fields to be able to populate each one of those. So you could run a query across your data set to say, show me all the patent disputes involving computers and high tech where we represent the defendant. And then you can go back to the client and say, yes, we've done X number of these patent disputes where we've represented defendants. Oh, and by the way, here's where we won or where we've lost. So this is how take these 4 fields and multiply them by hundreds. And we have about 3,000 of these fields that can you can go as granularly or as not granularly as you want to be able to implement this. And let me show you a bit about that. Another problem that SALI solves is the communication issue, because of the 3 stakeholders, that is clients, law firms, and vendors. I would wager that many people on this call today are actually already counting a lot of the things that SALI is also counting. You're already counting how many times you represented defendants versus plaintiffs, how many times you represented these things. So you're already counting a lot of things, but you probably call that thing that you're counting different than your client is calling the thing you're counting. So for example, if I want to say, show me all the banking law matters that we have, the client probably has a identifying number for what is banking law. That's probably different than the law firm's variable that they're calling banking law, which is probably different than the vendor's variable that they're calling banking law. And so if the 3 types of people want to communicate with each other, you can imagine that this becomes very expensive and very time consuming for the clients and the law firms and the vendors to all build separate APIs, that is ways that the computers can talk to each other, tried to pass these different variables, all trying to say banking law in a very different way. So what SALI's value proposition, one of its value propositions, is saying, hey, everybody just use the SALI standard. Everybody call banking law bank. That way we can have one API standard that works for clients that are SALI compliant, that works for firms that are SALI compliant, and that works for vendors that are SALI compliant. So as we pass data through all of us, everybody can very cheaply and easily be able to run queries across each other's systems to be able to better transmit that data. And of course, it's not just a single in the purple. It's not a single vendor, but there are multiple vendors. There's Fastcase is mine, Thomson Reuters, Lexis. You can imagine Clio. Wouldn't it be great if each of them also had that kind of speaking the same language, literally, from a variable point of view, so that if you as a law firm want the vendor one to be able to communicate with the vendor two, you would be speaking the same language for them. So to give an example of some of the areas of law in version 1 that was released in January of last year, that is January of 2020, the areas of law include, for example, banking law. And then for each of those parents, they also have children. So child of banking law is banking operations or bank secrecy and anti-money laundering. So you can see that the left column is the parent and the two on the right are the children. And then for each of those, they have a unique identifier. And in the technology speak, we call that a UUID or a universal ID. And for banking law, it's bank. For banking operations, it's BOPs. So this is a unique identifier that you as a law firm can send BOPs to your client, and everybody would know that BOPs is banking operations. So that's areas of law. Industry, we have many. For example, arts and recreation includes gambling. So if you have a gambling client, you could call that, for example, the AMUS is the code for gambling. What is the service? What am I doing as a lawyer? I could be advising on opinion memos. That's OPM, for example. Who's doing what? Who are the players and actors? You can imagine that there's an appellant or an acquiree or any other of dozens of these players and actors. And you can see that with version 1, we've actually created related services. So you could say that an appellant relates to appellate disputes, obviously. An acquiree relates to mergers and acquisitions. So you can see that here we've kind of connected the player and actor with the process. An acquiree relates to mergers and acquisitions. With version 2, we've actually expanded that quite significantly in a way that'll be more helpful to you as a law firm. So as I said, version 2 was worked on for about 3 years, was released January, February of last year. And so we've cataloged many of the billing variables and fields and given each of those a unique identifier that you see on the screen. We also provide that taxonomy, as I described earlier, to be able to say what things relate to other things and which are children of these parents. SALI version 2 is something that Jim Hannigan is on the phone right now, and Toby Brown is also worked on, and many others, including Steve from the ALA, who has really been doing really great work with us to be able to work on version 2. With version 2, we've expanded this quite a bit. And the biggest thing that we're expanding on is the business of law. And I know that the ALA is really focused on how do we as a law firm continue our entity? How do we make money? How do we expand market share? So of course, I could imagine that most folks on the call have had the question, how much is the budget for this area of law? Or what's our median cost for this type of thing? Or who has experience? Which lawyers are best in this jurisdiction for this judge or doing this merger in this area? To be able to answer those questions in a way to build more business, that's something that we're really trying to build more of for version 2. Another thing is knowing that answering those questions relies on substantive law. That is, if you ask the lawyer, how much is it going to cost for the thing? They're going to say, well, is it a patent litigation, which is going to be really expensive, or is it a slip and fall, which we could do really cheaply, right? That substantive area is really matters a lot to be able to give you a cost. So is this a debt financing deal? Is it product liability? Is it premises liability? Is it negligence? Each of those things is the things that need to be counted to be able to give good answers as to how much is this thing going to cost. That's the substantive law. And of course, the third aspect of that is to be able to say, what is the procedural law involved, especially for litigation? Which federal agency are we in front of? Because that's going to affect the cost. Do we want to go through a motion to dismiss? Because the motion to dismiss is a thing that costs more than just a letter to somebody, right? All of those procedural law areas are things that also should be counted to be able to give better idea of cost for such things. And that's what SALI version 2 isn't doing. So beyond that, we've taken lots and lots, thousands, literally thousands of litigation fields. As I said at the beginning, I litigated for 15 years for a large law firm. I also clerked for judges, both the appellate state court side and the district court federal side. So I used my experience in both the state and appellate clerkships, as well as to be able to, and federal side, and my 15 years of litigation practice, to be able to catalog everything that matters. And I'm going to go through that in a bit more. I also worked closely with Jim and others to be able to say what engagement terms matter for scoping things, for creating budgets, to be able to figure out whether it should be flat fee or not. And then we've placed all of these in version 2 in what's called a graph structure. This is something that the graph structure is something that your tech people would be really excited about. Maybe you will be less excited about, but I'll leave it for this audience to say that a graph structure will make it much, much easier for you to be able to find the information that you're looking for. And the last thing we're doing on version 2 is building separately a group to be able to build a standard API that is a SALI API that allows a law firm to be able to communicate in a standard way with a vendor, and also allow the client also to use the same API to be able to communicate in the same language with each of them. So that is something that we're building right now, and have as participants some of the biggest players in the market. We have Clio, we have Westlaw, we have Lexis, we have a bunch of others. So that interoperability is a key piece to be able to say, for each of the fields that we're going to be talking about, are we transmitting them in the same way? So we don't have to recreate the wheel as we go from vendor 1 to vendor 2, for example. So from version 1 to version 2, we've now gone to be able to exhaust more of the documents. Show me all the agreements, show me all the motions to dismiss, show me all the licenses, show me all the complaints. We've vastly expanded the documents that are most likely to be done in litigation and most likely to be done in transactional. We've also been added a new top level dimension called objectives. This is not, I want to pound the other side into submission, even though that could be a very good litigation objective. But an objective here is, I, as a litigator, want the judge to do X, or I, as a M&A person, want a deal to go through. So these objectives, that is causes of action, defenses, remedies, evidentiary burdens, it's largely on the litigation side, because those will increase or decrease the cost too. Another is, what are the events? So this is the closing for M&A. Here's a hearing coming up, the trial date's coming up, deposition. What is the time to trial? What is the time for discovery to close? Each of those things, from the start date to the close of discovery, the longer discovery goes, the more expensive it's going to be. So we've now added events for the close and opening of discovery, events for the close and opening of trial. Lastly, we're integrating service details. What am I as a lawyer doing at this point? Am I responding to an interrogatory? Am I attending a deposition? Each of those service details we're now integrating with more detail. So I mentioned this a bit earlier, but each of these nodes is not just Damian Reel's view or Jim Hannigan's view, or whatever the view is. I spent a lot of time this past year going through many treatises, many rules, going through a bunch of secondary sources to be able to, for example, go through all of California's causes of action. And then I went through all of New York's causes of action. Then I went through all of Florida's causes of action, then all of Texas's, and then all of Illinois'. And then I essentially took all of those causes of action and then made them into a normalized set that now lives in SALI. So this is not just my view, but this is the vast majority of most of the most common things that lawyers care about are counted here. So that way, it is not just Texas law, it's not just Florida law, it's not just California law, it's not just New York law, but it's broadly applicable, so that you can run a query across the entire United States to say, show me all of the motions to dismiss for breach of contract things that we've done across the US. And the odds are you'll be able to find it using a SALI query. So the way we're doing that is in a graph database, which is a bit different than the hierarchical database. And so since it's a non-technical group, I won't spend a lot of time in here. But the way that most data is stored today is in rows and columns. That is, the top row is labor and employment law. And then each of these below it is a child. So a type of labor and employment law is employment discrimination, if that makes sense. This is a hierarchical structure that most law firms use today. It does have some, that's a good way to store data, but there are also better ways to reflect the data. And the way that we reflect it in SALI is in the graph structure. So what that is the graph is what Facebook uses, the graph is what Google uses, the graph is what Amazon uses. And the way that they use this is to say, this is the way that Amazon can say, people who like this book often like that book. They do that through the graph. And when somebody searches for Paris, the graph is what tells them that you're looking for Paris, France, not Paris Hilton. So the graph is essentially powers some of the largest companies in the world. For example, each of the fields that we're going to be talking about is the blue noun, and then they're related with verbs. So for example, a noun on the left is a lawyer files a motion to dismiss. That's the graph within this. And then each of the nouns verbs can have modifiers. So you can say the lawyer who is a partner, filed on January 15th a motion to dismiss relating to breach of contract. So in that way, you can create very powerful reflections of who's doing what work. And the way that you can also relate those things to other aspects that really matter. So putting this in more concrete terms, you probably are part of law firms or others that have people whose roles have changed over time. For example, Jane Smith, you can see in the middle, played the role, that is the verb, of firm associate starting in 1980. So that's noun, verb, noun. Jane Smith also served the role of firm partner starting in 1985. She became a mediator in 2000, became a judge in 2010, and then became an arbitrator after that in 2020. You could see that in a rows and columns. If you thought, how would I reflect this in rows and columns? That'd be a lot harder than the very simple graph view that you see right here. And you can also see how this is a very effective way to be able to reflect reality of how things work. Another example on the substantive side is to say that for labor and employment, what are the types of labor and employment law that my law firm does? We do discrimination, we do employment health and safety, we also do immigration. But you can imagine a problem with that, saying, okay, immigration is a type of labor and employment law, that is H-1B visas, for example, are a type of immigration law. But immigration is also a kind of personal and family law. If you're just helping some immigrant move from country X to country Y, that's also an immigration that's different than labor and employment. So you can imagine in rows and columns, you would have to create a separate field for immigration for labor and employment law, which is different than immigration for personal and family law. That creates very complex structures in the rows and columns that we've simplified in the graph view. So for example, immigration is both a type of labor and employment law, and it's a type of personal and family law. And immigration is also venued in immigration court, which is a type of public and administrative law. So what we've done within SALI is to be able to create those connections to say that immigration is immigration is immigration. Of course, it might have labor and employment aspects. It also has personal and family aspects. And it's also argued in this court and also is related to this area of law. So the kind of connections here are what I would argue are some of the most valuable things that ALA can be able to take. To be able to say, not only here are the things we're counting, but here are the connections and the relationships that those things that we're counting have to each other. On a substantive side, you can imagine negligent misrepresentation. You might want to say, show me all the negligent misrepresentation case that we have. If you asked your lawyers, what kind of case is a negligent misrepresentation? Lawyer number one would say, well, of course, it's a misrepresentation claim. And lawyer one would be correct. Lawyer two would say, well, it's kind of a misrepresentation claim, but it's also a negligence claim because it's negligent misrepresentation. And lawyer two would also be correct. And lawyer three would say, well, yeah, it's kind of those two things, but it's also a defamation claim because negligent misrepresentation is person A saying something that is untruthful about person B. So they're defaming that person. So it's a defamation case. And lawyer three would also be right. So you can imagine if you're doing a rows and columns, how do you reflect that? How do you reflect that it's a misrepresentation and negligence and defamation? But with graph, you don't have to choose. You can be able to say that it's all three. Negligence is a type of misrepresentation. It's also a type of negligence, and it's also a type of defamation. It's all three. And negligence and defamation, by the way, are tort claims that are civil claims. And negligence and malpractice law and defamation law are things that my lawyers do. So you can imagine as an administrator, if you were asked, show me all the defamation cases that we've had, you could see how this would pull in the negligent misrepresentation in a way that wouldn't necessarily be if you just ran for defamation, because negligent misrepresentation is not the word defamation in a keyword is not there. So you would actually miss this negligent misrepresentation case. So the beauty of this is that there are many roads to Rome. If you run a query for misrepresentation, you'll get there. If you run a query for negligence, you'll get there. If you run a query for defamation, you'll get there. If you run a query for defamation law, you'll get there. So in this way, this relationship is what makes us even stronger and an even better way to be able to structure your data. Between the litigation and transactional side, often as a lawyer, I know that those two often don't play well together, but beautifully, SALI does play well in those spaces. So for example, a partner is a verb member of a limited partnership, exempted limited partnership, general partnership, right? So partner, member of these things, which is a type of partnership. You can imagine that's on the transactional side, but that has implications for litigation because partnerships often are either the plaintiffs or the defendants for partnership claims, which are types of corporate and partnership liability claims, which is a type of principal agent liability. I, as a board member or a partner for this LLP, might have liability for the LLP's actions. So if I run a query across my data set to be able to say, show me all the principal agent liability that involves a civil claim related to a partner, you'd be able to pull in all of your things because of these beautiful relationships that we've created here. And of course, each of these is a dispute or a transaction, or it might relate to business organizations. There are many roads to Rome, and you can run many different queries to get you to Rome, that is partner. And here you can see at the top level, here's all the top level entities that we went through earlier. Who's the actor? What is the area of law that I am a corporate lawyer? Where's the forum? What is the service? What am I providing? What are the objectives? All of those is categorized in this beautiful graph. The graph is reflected in a tool that you can see on your screen here. This is actually a screenshot from this tool to say a partner, and then we label each thing. So the label for partner is obviously partner. And the parent, a partner, is a type of role in matter. And then here you can see the beautiful relationships that we built out, that a partner is related to, see also biz orgs, partnership claims, corporate, and we also say that a partner is also a member of exempted limited partnerships. And partners also participate in the transactional practice. So at any rate, so we can be able to build as many of these relationships between these nodes as we'd like. Another benefit of the graph is that we are, say, failure to warn from a violent patient. So this is you can imagine that if you are a patient and your doctor doesn't tell you that your roommate is schizophrenic and then the roommate beats you up. So that you could say that's a failure to warn. Lawyer number one might say that's a negligence claim. Lawyer number two will say, no, it's a personal injury claim. Lawyer number three would say, no, that's a med mal claim. All three would be right. So you can see here that this is the parents of failure to warn for negligent patient. We've included all three of those. So whether you run a query on negligence or personal injury or med mal, it's all going to take you back to failure to warn, and that'll be show up as part of your query. So I guess that's maybe a quick overview. I'll do one more, maybe 5 more minutes, knowing that we're about halfway through our time. 5 more minutes on SALI and what it actually looks like in the SALI database. So here you can see on the left-hand side are all the things that matter in a hierarchical form. So for example, if I want to do, we'll say maritime negligence, I just run a query for maritime negligence, and then you can see that it actually shows up in my data set here. So you can see that maritime negligence is a type of negligence claim, which is a type of civil claim, which is a litigation claim, which is a litigation objective, which is an objective. So anyway, so that's maritime negligence. That is a type of negligence claim. It's also a type of admiralty and maritime claim. You can see that I've created 2 parents here. And then here you can see the beautiful graph that relates to maritime negligence in that maritime negligence is a negligence claim, which is also a tort claim, which is a civil claim, which is governed by the rules of civil procedure and also the rules of evidence, all the way up to the top. You can see that maritime negligence is also an admiralty and maritime claim, which is disputed in admiralty court, which relates to admiralty and maritime law, which is a type of water transportation law, which is a type of transportation case, which relates to my client's industry. So you can imagine you're an administrator and the partner comes to you and says, we have a transportation industry client that wants to work with us. How many transportation industry cases do we have? You can imagine running a query on transportation and using the beautiful graph that we've created here to pull up every maritime negligence case that you've ever had. So this is the beauty of this is that you could extract maritime negligence from the text of your documents. So if your brief says maritime negligence, then you can immediately say, yep, that's a transportation case. You don't have to recreate the wheel. You would just say, okay, I'm just going to pull up all the maritime negligence because I queried for transportation negligence. So I hope you're able to see some of the power that being able to, 1, count all the things, but more importantly, 2, show the relationships between the things you're counting to be able to better get a sense of what I'm doing in my law firm or client and how I can be able to answer the questions, show me all of the X. And lastly, to be able to use the same things that we're counting that our clients are using, and counting the same things that the vendors are using, like Fastcase or Westlaw or Lexis, so that I can run a query on Fastcase or Lexis for transportation cases, or for admiralty and maritime cases, or for these claims, and know that the API query I send to Fastcase is going to be the same API query I send to Westlaw, which is the same API query that I'm sending to Lexis. So I don't need to run the recreate the wheel. Everyone is speaking the same data language to get the same results. So I think that's a decent place to pause and to be able to ask if anyone on the call has questions about what I just discussed. I know that I talk fast, and my caffeine intake today was more than maybe normal. So I know that April has recorded this, so you can go through anything that I just mentioned.
And I don't see any questions yet, Damien, but while people are thinking of them, practically speaking, if I'm, I'm in a firm and I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is really cool. I would like to introduce this in my firm. What are the different tools or mechanisms? What you mentioned, fast business partners, Westlaw, Thomson Reuters. I mean, if I wanted to implement this into my firm, what's my next step?
That's a great question, April. So the one thing that we've emphasized, Jim and I and everybody on the SALI side, is that you as a stakeholder in this, whether it's a client or a law firm or a vendor, a stakeholder in this can go as deeply or shallowly as you'd like. If you want to implement all 3,000 plus of these nodes, we would love that. If you want to implement 10 of those nodes, awesome, implement the 10. So I would say, as at the onset, to answer April's question, you can take as many or as few of these things as you would like, and that would be absolutely okay. Some areas that people are particularly interested in is even getting a sense of, if we go back to the PowerPoint that I had, to be able to get a sense of what areas of law am I working in? Is this banking law? Is this, go to this, right? So is this banking law? Is this, I guess let me show actually the thing. So areas of law, so banking law, corporate law, education law, environmental law, to even be able to say that these are the areas that I do work as a law firm. That's a good place to start because something that SALI has heard from people who are implementing SALI is that what to call each of these things is a very hard decision internally, because lawyer one disagrees with lawyer two, which disagrees with lawyer three, which disagrees with lawyer four, as to whether to call it banking law or whether to call it something else. So the benefit of SALI is that you as an administrator don't need to settle that argument. You would just say, hey, SALI is the standard. We're going to go with the standard. We're not going to go with the lawyer's idiosyncrasies, because we as a law firm need to communicate with our clients, and we need to communicate with the vendors. Clients and vendors are jumping onto SALI. We should too. So we should call corporate law the same corporate law as everybody else is, or corporate governance, et cetera. So to answer April's question, one area that is a low-hanging fruit is, what area of law does this matter relate to? Another area is what industry, for example, is my client in? Are they in agriculture, educational services, information, which includes all sorts of things, including internet and other software? So being able to say, what industries do we do work? That's also something that is a frequent question, I'm sure, of almost everybody on this call. I have this new construction client. What kind of work do we do for them? So if you take construction and then relate it to the area of law, so I want to do banking work for construction companies, that's pretty low-hanging fruit that you don't have to do too much work to be able to go into. If you want to go further down into the rabbit hole, that is a beautiful rabbit hole that I've been down, you can go in even further and say, what kind of document is this thing? You of course have litigation documents, you have transactional documents, and then you can go all the way down to say, here are all the motions that we filed in the trial court. Let me show you all of the motions for summary judgment or the motions to dismiss. So you can get very granular as to how much does it cost to do this type of motion. That's another way that you could go. And then we're working right now with one law firm that is doing work for a client that is being able to go through the time entries. And whenever the time entry, for example, talks about a motion for summary judgment, they take that down and put a SALI field for that. So the summary judgment is a document that now I'm able to say, okay, this is a document that we can now count and be able to say that it costs this much generally for summary judgment motions as reflected in our timesheets, for example. So anyway, so that's especially when I say a summary judgment in the Southern District of New York might be more expensive than a summary judgment in the District of Arkansas, for example. So once you coordinate, summary judgment with one of these other fields, in banking law or patent law or something else like that, the cost for summary judgment motion varies depending on whether it's patent law or health law or education law. Being able to take each of those tags that you see on your screen and be able to coordinate them to say, okay, this is how much we think it'll cost and how much time we think it'll take to do these things. I hope that answers your question, April.
Kind of. and there were some follow-ups. I will say my favorite, the two words I've heard together that you just used gave me a giggle: SALI and field. SALI field.
It's true. We came to that realization about a month ago, and what makes me think about that you like me, you really like me, as Sally Field said in 1970s.
So two questions came in right after I asked mine, and I think there are follow-ups to it. So in less of a conceptual form and more of a practical form, like what are the actual steps for the people that are on this call right now? Do they need to sign up for SALI? Do they need particular software or to connect to a website? Is there a cost involved? And if so, what is that? So that's so now that we like this, how do we get this into our firms, and especially for people maybe that don't have these humongous technology departments to work with?
Yeah, so that's a really good question that I'm glad you asked. So once you get access to the SALI, which is hosted by Stanford, this is a Stanford website. It's currently hosted by Stanford. It will eventually be hosted by SALI itself. But it's an amazing, the thing is called Web Protege. And I know that ALA is also using Web Protege for its work. So once you get access to Web Protege in Stanford, number one, you can be able to browse, like I've just been browsing through, to be able to look through all the things that we have to offer. That's thing number one. But more importantly, to April's question, how do I extract data from it? You can go right here and you can say download. So I can download the public side in various XML formats. And then once I do that, you're able to then do your tech people, I shouldn't say you'll ask your tech people, who I'm sure will be thrilled to be able to have beautiful XML. They'll be able to see exactly what you're looking for, and they'll have beautiful, well-structured XML like you see on your screen right now. So you can see that this is essentially the export that I just made. And each of these is structured data that your tech people would be able to make sense of what you see on your screen and be able to then maybe implement it in a way that makes sense to your law firm for your law firm's particular uses. So that's way number one, is exporting to XML. Way number two is to be able to export in the regular rows and columns, as I talked about earlier. So not only can you be able to access it from the XML like you saw on your screen, but I'm going to show you here the rows and columns that are exported here. So if you prefer to have rows and columns, this is all of the rows and columns that we have, along with the parents of each of those rows and columns here, as well as the labels, as well as the different labels. Motion to transfer venue is also known as the motion to change venue, for example. So each of these is in rows and columns. So if you and your law firm prefer to have rows and columns over the graph, as I talked about earlier, the graph is actually reflected in this rows and columns. So for example, a motion to dismiss is a motion that responds to the complaint. It's also a dispositive motion. It's also a motion in a trial court. So in that way, you can kind of have the best of both worlds. You have the rows and columns as your tech people are currently interested, and you also have the graph-like to be able to say multiple parents for this one thing. So at any rate, so that's an answer, is that you can get it in very technical, so that you can export it and use it in your tech people can use it right away in XML format, or to the extent you just want to make a list of all the things that matter, you could also do that this way.
And I'll just fill in here, and you can correct me if I say anything wrong, because I'm sure I will. It's my understanding, well, this is open source, right? So it's free for anyone to use. You don't have to pay to use these standards, and that the SALI Alliance does have membership, but it's really for those who are interested in giving kind of input and direction of the standards. And the I always say it wrong, LMSS, is that right?
That's right.
Yes, is one of the taxonomies under the SALI umbrella, and there could be more to come. And that some of the vendors are figuring out ways to implement this taxonomy into their products so that it would be easier to use at the firm level. Did I say anything wrong there?
So I'm going to let Jim or the person talk about open source. Yeah, you go ahead, Jim.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Okay, great. Yeah, so no, April, you very concisely and correctly summarized it. I don't have to add anything to that. Thank you. I just want to also mention that what Damon's showing here is not technically released. This extensive version 2 is in progress, and we're getting comments on. The version that is released is on sali.org as well in Excel. People download, and it's easier to consume. But you can get it also from Web Protege. I just want to make that clear that this advanced content is still in development. But yeah, really what SALI is about is open source. The codes are free to use for anybody. We have membership that we rely on to help us get the momentum and get the traction we need to further the cause. So you feel free to, if you really want to be involved, look into membership, and there's more on the website for that. Yeah, no, this is everything that's been said has been spot on. So.
Right. And to further what Jim said, you can see that those who were looking at my screen, you can go to sali.org. You can see right now, download the full LMSS. And a big shout out to Bert and Steve, who have helped make this website so beautiful. They've been a huge help. This is all Bert's and Steve's work. So if you as a user click on download full LMSS, you're able to see what you see on your screen right now, which is an overview of the version 1, that is the ones that was released in January of 2020, and the structure that it's related to, different containers, code sets, really a lot of really helpful information in a rows and columns format that is the same as the what you'd see in the Stanford.org. So if I go to my home and I go to LMSS version 1, you could also ask ask me or Jim, or I'm sure if you ask April, they can pass along the requests to get access to these things. And so you can see here is LMSS 1, which is showing you all of the things, for example, bank secrecy law, and all of the things that are in this Excel spreadsheet is also reflected here in the Web Protege. Some people have found this to be a little more easily to be able to go through than the Excel spreadsheets, but whatever way you want, it's easily covered.
Right. And I want to speak to the vendor issue. I would say in the last 6 months, we've seen a clear uptick in interest in actual implementation of it from the vendors. Thomson Reuters, Lexis, Net Documents, all over the map. And that was, I've been involved now for almost 5 years, I think, and we never had that level of engagement before. So there's definitely been a shift and just based on what I can tell, and what they're actually saying we are going to implement now. So just want to amplify that point.
That's right. And from speaking as a vendor, because I'm not just a member of SALI, of course, I'm also a vendor myself. Almost 100% of my time is implementing all of these 3,000 items into Fastcase. And of course, as Jim said, Westlaw is also doing that. Lexis is, Clio is also interested in it, and a whole bunch of other vendors. This is something that I think everyone in the vendor industry knows that they need to interoperate. Vendor one needs to interoperate with vendor 2, and they need to be able to make that data uniform. And of course, SALI is that way. SALI is the way to make that, to communicate in a standard way what is the industry that I'm really working on. So at any rate, that's I will say that Fastcase and others are doing that work.
Another question has come in. If you do get to a document level, do you see this as assisting in classification for confidential, restricted, attorney-client privilege, et cetera?
Absolutely. So you can see each one of those things that you had is part of that. So you can see that a confidential informant, confidential narrative, confidential is a thing, privilege is a thing that we've gone through. So you could think of this like a tag. You can add any number of these tags to all the things. So, privilege log is a thing, privilege itself is a thing. Attorney-client privilege is a thing, clergy penitent privilege, counselor pupil privilege. We've gone very deeply on all the types of privilege that one could even care about. And again, this comes from treatises. This comes from bar association materials that relate to causes of action and other things. So at any rate, I would wager that I'm very confident that any law firm would have a hard time finding something that they care about that is really important that is not in this data set. And I would say that if you do find something that is not in this data set, we want to hear about it because we want to make this, as Jim said, this is something that we want to get better. So the beauty of this is that if you want your idea to make it into SALI, the most important people, I guess three most important people to make that happen are Jim, Steve, and I, who are on this call right now. So to the extent you can say, hey, you're missing X, we could be able to implement X.
I know I've read some articles and seen some interviews with firms that are currently using the standard. Could you give some examples for everyone?
Sure. It varies. One of the issues in terms of time, the time it's taken to get to this stage is that each firm is different in where they are with codes and in terms of their evolution and their how much legacy they have, where they want to go. So, it's taken time to find firms that really want to overhaul to a great extent, which we ideally would be the case where we say, let's switch out old codes and put in new ones. We think these are better, but most firms aren't going to be able to do that. They're going to do it incrementally. So a handful of firms full-blown implementation of all of them. Others have done bits, meaning they take parts that they like and add to theirs. But we built this so that you can map to older. We built it in the sense of balancing granularity with generality. So meaning that we're not too detailed and we're not too general. So the mapping is easier to accomplish that way. So that we always knew that we're going to have that transition stage of a mapping from SALI to legacy code. So it really varies, but when often my firm's going through right now, at some point in their lifetime, they will need to revisit these things. And when that time comes, we are making ourselves known as we can help you do that. Because as Damien said earlier, I think this is not something that's in most skill sets of people at law firms to do taxonomy development, just not. And all the political issues that come along with it within a firm. So we are seeing that people react to us being, kind of a source of information that they otherwise wouldn't have to make this happen more efficiently. Because some firms take years doing this. I'm not kidding, because of the amount of work it takes to do it right. So we're seeing the over time, gradual shift towards understanding of how this is valuable and people willing to make the case in firms to use it.
And to follow up, I agree 100% with what Jim said. And I would say that to the extent that anyone on this call needs some institutional heft to say this is important to do this work, I think the biggest selling point to a check writer that is a partner, a managing partner, or whomever is in charge of saying, yes, go ahead, you have the green light to do this thing, is to say, this is how we can make more money, right? This is how we can expand our business, because this is how we find out what we're good at and what areas and what things that we've done to be able to then go to our clients and prospective clients to say, hey, we are the best firm for you because of X. And X is essentially contained within the SALI fields. So anyway, to the extent that a check writer has any questions about whether this is a good effort or not, you can come back and say, this is a way that we can make more money.
And I mean, have you heard of firms using it for AFAs or client budget tracking? I mean, is anyone actively using it that way?
Not yet. And the reason is that's a two-way discussion, dialogue with clients and firms. But that's our goal, is to make that happen to where the clients are also using it. We are making inroads there. So right now, the majority of the implementation has been about internal use. But that was the original impetus for the standard, was actual client firm communication around new matters, pitches, budgets, pricing, all that. So that's still valid for that. But we had to start somewhere, and the first LMSS that we released was really pretty basic in terms of the data points. But hugely important because a lot of those basic data points weren't well developed by anybody. So we were the first I know of to do it that way. That was kind of like a baby step. And now we're version 2 that Damon showed is getting more at that granularity for those types of use cases.
Good.
But
and I would also add to that to say that I would wager that every law firm that is doing AFAs today is probably counting the data points that we include in SALI right now. So there's probably if they are not using SALI to do AFAs today, they could probably still benefit from SALI to be able to, number one, map the data points they are counting with what SALI already has. And then 2, be able to say, oh, SALI actually has these data points that we're not using for AFAs, but boy, that'd be really helpful if we did count those things, because then we could get a much better, I know that I was having trouble doing a budget for this area because I just didn't have enough data. So to the extent that law firms are doing AFAs, I would wager that they would do really well to look at our data set to be able to, 1, map it, and 2, be able to get ideas that they haven't already thought of.
Yeah, this version 2 content is informed by tools like AFA software, pricing tools. So, for litigation. So we have pulled together a lot of sources to figure out what is important for that use case. But this, the fact that NetDocs came on board, that was out of nowhere. That's a DMS survey. It's nothing to do with pricing and budgeting. It was pretty impressive. It was heartening because it showed that we did build this in a way that is cross-platform, has validity cross platforms.
That's right, and of course the engagement terms are something that I haven't mentioned yet, but you can see here engagement terms. What type of engagement fee? You can see that there's lots of things that are into AFAs, and again, this is version 2, not version 1. So it's still a draft; it's not yet finalized, but we've included a lot of the things that are in AFAs to be able to make that mapping easier.
There was a question that came in prior to today's session. Well, 2 of them actually that I want to follow up on. One is, how can paralegals support SALI? Because they're not necessarily always paired with a lawyer. And is there a place for the Paralegal Association or paralegals and to forward this initiative?
Jim, you want to take a first cut at
it? We could really use their knowledge of the tasks and processes that they're doing to help inform these codes, because we're getting into the practice now with this. Version 1 was more about the business and in the sense of the matters, specifics, but this is about now getting into what lawyers and staff do in a matter. So we could really benefit from people talking through, like, for example, litigation e-discovery is a great example of how do we make sure that these codes reflect the work that goes on there, because we haven't really had that input yet. That's one thing I can think of. Damien, anything else you can think of?
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% right. So if you imagine, my document collection practice, for example, I have paralegals often do a lot of the things that I'm highlighting on my screen right now. They analyze, collect, identify, present, preserve, produce, review. Right. This is something that when I was litigating, that's something that paralegals did a lot. And so I could imagine that, number 1, as Jim said, they could help inform us to be able to find maybe things that we haven't thought of. And number 2 is I know that at least the paralegals in my law firm often had a say in the systems that they implement. So for example, SALI might be something that a paralegal might be able to say, hey, I just heard about this thing called SALI that would make our lives so much easier. For these flat fee matters, we would save X% of our time if we just tagged all the things using SALI codes. So anyway, so that's, I would say, 2 things. Number 1 is, as Jim said, help us with be able to fill out our data set. And number 2, to be able to be evangelists, to be able to expand it within the law firms.
And I know we're almost out of time, but that's a great segue into the second question that I was going to ask. And Steve, feel free to jump in here too. So, ALA has the UPBMS, which is, the process-based management codes. And so the question is, how do we integrate, or how do we get these 2 to work together side by side?
I think we need to find where the overlap is and make sure that we're aligned. And I think there is overlap, I'm pretty sure. We have not yet built into SALI anything to do with, accounting work or, kind of back office IT things like that. Eventually it will happen. And really we'd be leveraging UPVS. But I think that right now the first step would be to see where the overlap is and make sure we're not going down a path where we can't, we don't want to backtrack, to make sure, to do that kind of, connection.
I don't know if Steve has other thoughts, but I would say that Steve and Bert have also gone to the extent that you want to go down the road that Jim just mentioned, which I think would be a good road to go on. Jim and Bert have implemented UTBMS in Web Protege. That is, they have eventually have a different stand-up of that. So to the extent that we do want to find the overlap, as Jim has mentioned, Steve's and Bert's good work on that will make that merger easier.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. This was a fabulous discussion. Thank you so much. If there are other topics that you would like to discuss at future roundtables, please email profdev@alanet.org. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us on the call today. I know this is a topic and some more acronyms in your vocabulary. And I think it's a really exciting initiative that ALA is happy to be a part of. So thank you for taking the time on this Friday to spend with your fellow members. And thank you very much again to Damien and to Jim for joining us and giving us this fabulous presentation.
Thank you to ALA for the ongoing support. Very, very helpful.
Indeed. Every Friday we meet with Steve and Bert, and that's one of the highlights of my week is meeting with those guys. So thank you so much.
I'm talking about years of support. Thank you.
Indeed.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great Friday, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.